God in Darkness, Book 1, Truthseeker. Written by Stephen Eric Johnson. Read to you by Matthias Justin Johnson. Chapter 2, Breaking In, Blowing Out. "At least Black is slimming," Patricia Ames said with a wry smirk, tugging the ski mask over her head, pressing her short, curly black hair tight against her scalp. Adi Kolovich grinned at her from across the back of the van, shrugging before he pulled his own mask over his face. "It could be worse," commented the Eastern European, his accent faint but nevertheless noticeable. "We could have to infiltrate a circus. I think that clown makeup would not suit you." Patricia snorted at this, less because she thought Adi was being funny, and more because of the tension of the situation. Any lightheartedness was welcome. She could hardly believe that, in a matter of a week, she'd gone from an electrical engineer and the manager of a successful construction company to an industrial saboteur. Doing her best not to dwell on thoughts of what this would mean for her future, for her family's future, Patricia instead did her best to pull the series of straps intended to hold her gear onto her body. This was harder than she'd expected, and not just because of the complicated nature of the harness. "I really need to lose some weight," Patricia grumbled inwardly. "But then, I've been telling myself that for years." "Please, allow me," said Adi, his own combat harness already in place, reaching across the van toward her. Patricia moved her hands out of the way, an open invitation for Adi to help out however he liked. The tall, large-boned woman couldn't help but admire the speed of the pale, slender European's long-fingered, deft hands as he easily fit her harness into place, then straightened the items she carried on it so that she'd be able to reach them easily when she needed them. "You must be great in bed with hands like those," Patricia teased the brown-haired man sitting opposite her. Adi just winked in reply. "Silly children," snorted Solon, the swarthy driver of the van, as he finished the last of his cigarette, partially leaning his head out the window to make sure the smoke didn't linger inside. "You are just lucky that I am a married man, Miss Ames, or I might take you up on your flirting, if Adi does not." He grinned into the rear-view mirror. "Or unlucky, depending on your point of view." Then he turned the wheel, the ride suddenly getting bouncy as they went over rough terrain for a few minutes, then came to a stop. "We are here, children. Everybody out." Her retort to Solon dying with the van's engine, Patricia realized her heart was already racing, and she hadn't even gotten out yet. Then she looked at Adi, so calm and relaxed, his expression one of playful boredom, and she forced herself to take deep breaths, to stay focused on the here and now. Thinking about consequences would just make her freeze up, and then she'd be no use to anybody. The rear of the van slid to reveal the night without, as Solon pulled its doors open and stepped to the side, letting Adi and Patricia hop out onto the grass next to him. He was clad as they were, in black, complete with matte equipment harness. Patricia and Adi's eyes followed those of Solon as he looked towards the barbed wire fence surrounding the facility they were to infiltrate, and then swung back around to look at the older Mediterranean man as he, in turn, regarded them. "This is the last chance either of you will have to back out," said Solon in his perpetually, almost maddeningly, calm voice. "You both know that we may have to kill people while getting in, if we make any mistakes. People will almost certainly die on the way out, once we find him." There was a hard glint in his steel-gray eyes as he said this. "If you choose to continue, knowing this, know this also. Those within the walls of that place are guilty of murder and worse. There are no innocents to be found in this place." A deeply tanned hand touched one of the knives on his harness, and Patricia couldn't help but notice how many knives there were, as Solon continued. "We are about to enter one of the gateways to hell. Do you wish to continue?" Patricia looked at Adi, swallowing nervously at the weight in the Mediterranean man's voice and words. The way he said that they were entering hell, she got the very real impression that he wasn't being figurative. Adi, though, was as calm and relaxed as ever, no trace of fear or even concern marring his lean, European good looks. "These are the people who have ruined my country," Adi said with a shrug. "They are the people who killed my father. My father told me sometimes about his special friend, someone that these people hated, someone that they feared." Adi's hand brushed the hilt of the samurai sword on his back, his thumb tracing the smooth wood at its base in a fashion that spoke of long habit, the only betrayal of any nervousness he might feel. "I am committed, Solon. There is nothing left to decide." Both men turned to look at Patricia. The woman swallowed nervously for a moment, then looked at the fenced-in Gordian facility, the facility her company had built. Perhaps things would have been different if Patricia had been born white. That was the cruel joke of her life. She was a black woman passing for white in a world that had decided that blacks were no longer acceptable. Ever since she'd been a little girl, she'd been bleaching her skin, first with help from her mother, and later on her own. The process hurt, a lot, but every treatment lasted from 5 to 7 months, depending on how much time she spent in the sun. And here she was, a black woman posing as a white woman, working for the Karavnos Corporation, the company known as the single greatest facilitator of her race's near total demise, building one of their research facilities on the edge of the city. Even so, perhaps things would have been different if Patricia had been born a man. She'd come from a long line of strong men, her family very patriarchal in nature, with the sons always taking up the reins when their fathers grew old and retired. The little construction business her great-grandfather had once worked for had been bought out by her grandfather, who then handed it to her father, and her father handed it to her younger brother. The joke of it was, her younger brother was an idiot. Patricia loved him to pieces, but he was still an idiot. She was the older child, the one who'd been smart enough to get a scholarship based on her grades alone, smart enough to get her engineering degree, followed by a degree in business administration. Patricia knew how to run a business, and, more importantly, she knew how to run her father's business, and had done so for years alongside her father, while her brother spent his time messing around in school and wasting his father's money. But her father believed in tradition, and so Patricia's brother inherited the business, and soon after picked up a lucrative construction contract from the Karavnos Corporation to install the wiring for their building, the Gordian facility. Being an electrical engineer, and not wanting to ruin her family's business just because of her brother's stupid mistake in ever taking work from the Karavnos, Patricia worked hard to put in that wiring, to make it just right. In the process, she also became intimately familiar with the blueprints of the research facility until she knew the place by heart. Not long after the facility had been completed, Patricia had been contacted through the mail by a man who called himself the Greek on some occasions, the Turk on others. His real name was Solon, no last name given. He was writing from a post office box in the city, the delivery time about a day between letters, making use of a private courier service to ensure that his letters to her were confidential, and requiring her to write her returns in as simple a format as possible, not revealing anything that might have been suspicious to the post office censors. He'd been charming in print, far more charming than he'd been in person when they finally met a few days later. Solon knew everything about Patricia, all of her secrets, though he never said how he knew. The second time they met, at a little coffee shop about a mile from her home in the suburbs around the city, he brought Adi with him. It was Adi that had finally convinced Patricia to act, his quiet, calm, perfectly rational idealism reminding her of what she felt about her own family, what she felt about her own honor. Patricia Ames had brought that bastard of a building into this world, and by the gods, she was going to take it out. "Let's do this," she said, her jaw set. "Power-dampening fields firmly in place," said Dr. Barry Fields, knowing that Kronos, the central computer connecting all points owned by the Caravnos Corporation, heard and recorded his every word. Vital signs subdued but stable. Lights have been dampened to enhance the effects of the sedatives and assist in the experiments to come. As he spoke, Fields was standing in the stark, sterile white environment of his research laboratory, looking into the darkness beyond a thick plexiglass panel. The plexiglass was tested as unbreakable by any force less than a good ton or so of nitroglycerin, and Fields felt completely safe from the thing that lay behind it, heavily sedated and heavily restrained, with the very finest materials the physical sciences could bring to bear. He heard people mumble about the gods watching over them on a regular basis, but in truth only science really mattered to Dr. Fields. What could compare to the perfection of the scientific method? What could possibly replace the precision of deductive logic? All that was missing, of course, was the human element to decide what to do with science, and he filled that gap quite nicely, if he did say so himself. "Now attempting first contact," said Fields, addressing Kronos as well as the small panel of his fellow scientists, standing behind another plastic glass panel, this one somewhat less thick than the one holding the subject of his studies. "I know you can hear me," he continued, walking right up to the plexiglass, hands clasped behind his back. "I don't believe we've met before, though I assure you I am one of your biggest fans." Fields paused for a moment, giving the being within the dark cell ample time to process his words before continuing. "I've read everything about you. You are subject K6, the numeral indicating the number of times that you have been caught over the past 200 years, if I have read the reports correctly. A great embarrassment to the Caravnos, I'm sure, to have something like you running amok, and after they made you so well, too." "I was not made by humans," said a deep, deep voice from within the darkened cell, so deep and so powerful that, as close as he was standing to the speaker, Fields felt his whole body shudder slightly with the vibrations. And the subject wasn't even speaking very loudly. "Marvelous," said the doctor, clapping his hands as he beamed at the unseen creature in the cell beyond. "You can speak after all. That will make so much of my work with you vastly easier. Do you know why you are here, K6? "You are here to explore the labyrinth," came the answer after a moment's pause. "It is a trove of secrets that can only be unlocked in darkness." "If you refer to the anomaly that accompanies your person, then you are correct," Fields affirmed with a nod, not really knowing, or caring, if the subject could even see him. "According to the reports, you were designed to have a high psychic profile. A great rarity, psychic ability, almost unheard of in any significant magnitude outside of manufactured beings such as yourself." Of course, Fields was speaking as much for the benefit of his audience, including Kronos, as to the subject in the cell before him. "I am the foremost expert in the world on protean field mechanics. Not long after you were decanted, your psychic abilities proved more powerful than was anticipated. They were so powerful, they tore through the fabric of the standard 4 dimensions themselves. What you so dramatically call the labyrinth is your ability to draw on the nigh unlimited energy to be found elsewhere. It is this constant influx of energy that has allowed you to maintain your vitality long past your date of planned obsolescence." "You mean when I was supposed to die," the voice said calmly, gently correcting the doctor. "If you prefer," answered Dr. Fields with a shrug, slightly annoyed at the interruption, before he continued. "My employers are most interested in making use of your special abilities, or more precisely, of the power that you can access. Therefore, my job here will be to find a way to separate you from the anomaly that accompanies you. This will likely end in your termination, but I understand that this was the fate intended for you by our mutual employers anyway, and so should not be so great a loss, especially not after a little over 2 centuries of life." A low chuckle came from the speaker, making the white-coated coterie behind Fields shift slightly in nervous surprise, though Fields himself simply waited and listened, too caught up in the magnificence of the moment to really notice. "You were set to this task by Apollo," said the voice in slow, even tones, each word resonating with subtle nuance. "If you mean Apollo Harris," replied Fields, smiling pleasantly, "then yes, he was the one who brought me on board." "Do you know what will happen after Apollo has used you to kill me?" The question finally made Dr. Fields blink in surprise. "Isn't it obvious?" he countered. "I shall become both rich and famous, the scientist who unlocked the secrets of dimensional energy, unlimited energy. Then I shall live out the rest of my days in happiness on a beach somewhere, hopefully with a great many topless and no doubt nubile women to attend to my needs. If all obtaining that goal requires is the productive extinguishing of a single life in the name of science, then I do not really care what else might come of my work." Suddenly pausing, Fields's face turned bright red. Those were certainly his real reasons for studying protein fields, but they weren't something that he had ever intended to say aloud. Certainly not before Kronos or his white-coated colleagues. "How did you do that?" Fields demanded of the being in the darkened room. "Not even you should be able to use any psychic abilities under such heavy shielding." "The power of the gods, Dr. Bareth Abram Fields," answered the voice with irreproachable certainty. "Do you believe in the gods?" "I believe in science," answered Fields with contempt, not pausing for a moment to consider how the subject could have known his full name. "You there," he called out, turning to face the gathered scientific body, his fellow researchers. "We've got lots of work, and it's going to be a long night. Surely you heard what he said. The secrets of the labyrinth can only be explored in darkness." Glancing back at the darkened cell, Fields smirked grimly. "What better time to start than right now?" The hardest part of getting in, as it turned out, was getting past the high chain-link fence surrounding the facility. Patricia was grateful that neither Solon nor Oddie felt like climbing the fence, since she didn't rate her chances on the barbed wire at the top very highly at all. Instead, they let her do the work of very carefully redirecting each sensor in the area of fencing where they were, clipping on several handy little devices she'd made for such occasions, though they were originally intended for more legal uses, fooling the sensors into thinking that, as each link was snipped by Solon's wire cutters, the system was still functioning perfectly. Patricia had set up her charge redirectors in a wide semicircle at Solon's direction, before letting the lean, swarthy man slip past her with his duffel bag. "I like dogs," explained Solon in a whisper as he reached into the bag. "I don't want to hurt the ones on patrol." So saying, he tugged out what appeared to be a rather large orange tabby. The tabby was limp in Solon's hands, and looked dead, which made both Patricia and Oddie start slightly, obviously appalled. Solon glanced at them both and chuckled. "Cat lovers," he said with a roll of his eyes, before he began prodding the belly of the cat. The furry little body was, as it turned out, not a cat at all, as an audible click quickly revealed that the cat was actually an automaton, its whole body starting to life as soon as it was activated. Setting the electric cat's paws on the ground, Solon grinned as he released it, patted its rump once, and then watched as it took off at a brisk pace. "Amusing device," he murmured. "It operates like an automated vacuum. It continues until it senses something, then rushes to avoid it. In this case—" Solon paused as the cat turned the corner of the building, its disappearance almost immediately followed by the sounds of loud barking, "guard dogs." The sounds of loud cursing filled the air as the guard leading his dogs tried and failed to keep them under control at the appearance of something that looked and smelled just like a cat. The three partners in crime crawled through the opening made by Patricia and Solon, Oddie in the lead. As each of them made it through the fence, they raced to the shadow of the building, Oddie still leading as he touched the backs of his gloves, which promptly began to produce a soft humming sound. By the time Solon had reached the side of the building, Adi was already halfway up its wall, the suction grips of his gloves working perfectly. By the time Patricia reached the side of Solon, the slender European was just finishing attaching a lightweight cable to the top with a near-silent drill. Another few seconds, and Adi flung the other end of the cable down, letting first Solon and then Patricia clamber up its side to the slightly angled rooftop. "Skylight, there," said Patricia softly, breathing hard after the frantic climb, pointing to a rise in the roof. Her companions nodding, they made their way over the roof towards the rise, climbing up to discover the high-placed skylight. Now it was time for all three of the companions to work together. Adi used his small drill to carefully open the cement outer side of the raised skylight, revealing the alarm mechanism that would surely go off if anyone tampered with it, while Patricia and Solon caught each bit of cement as it fell away, tucking it into Solon's duffel bag to ensure they didn't make noise. Patricia swung into action soon after, using the wire cutter to snip several wires one by one after she fit each of their bared ends with more of her clip-on charge redirectors, ensuring that the security station within the building wouldn't notice more than a momentary flicker. Finally, Solon directed Adi to use his gripper gloves to seize hold of the frosted plexiglass, while Solon used the drill to shear through the cement edges holding the plexiglass in place as quickly and carefully as he could. A tug, and Adi was setting the heavy plexiglass aside with a soft grunt of exertion, even as Solon grabbed the climbing cable, its gripping end still drilled into the cement near the edge of the roof. The swarthy man dropped the cable down into the lobby, then slid down its length, followed shortly afterward by Adi and Patricia. "Easy," said Solon with a grin as his companions joined him in the lobby of the research facility. Patricia was about to make a sarcastic retort when the sound of barking and a loud caterwauling was heard outside the large, clear, plastic-glass doors of the facility. Turning, the trio watched as the electric cat raced past the doors, followed shortly thereafter by a pair of guard dogs, and shortly after that by a human guard, obviously breathing hard as he worked to keep up. "Next time," commented Solon with a smug smile, "they will train their dogs better." "Now we are on a time schedule," said Adi, his own smile grim. "That guard will surely see the hole in the fence when the dogs pass it." "Then our need for stealth is almost at an end," Solon concluded, walking to the electronically locked door behind the receptionist's desk at the far end of the lobby and briskly swiping a magnetic security card through the lock's reader. It was modeled on Patricia's own magnetic security card, except that Solon had made use of one of his many contacts, likely the same one from which he'd gotten much of the gadgetry they'd used so far, to have a functional but blanked identity card made, giving all of the access with none of the responsibility. The reader for the card promptly blinked green, and the lock clicked open, the door swinging wide with automatic precision for the trio. For a moment, all three companions stood and stared, the view beyond the door nothing like what they had really expected. Not even Patricia had really known what to expect, having worked more on the wiring than the decor. What lay before the three was a strangely twisting, almost organic-looking array of corridors. Some went up, while others led downward, and it seemed as though they were all deliberately tangled together, their end destination incomprehensible to a casual observer. Had they been any other set of burglars, even if they had been skilled enough to have made it this far, they would likely have never made it through the building to their destination in time. "I see why this is called the Gordian facility," said Solon with an arched eyebrow. "This place is worse than the knot. Miss Ames, if you please." Solon's voice startling her back into the present, and to the job for which she had been brought into this business, Patricia pointed to the left. "Just stay close behind me," she said, starting off in the indicated direction. "It's easy to get lost in here. I spent most of my on-site time in the ducts, which are a lot more straightforward, and it was still easy to get lost." "Duly noted," answered Solon, falling into step behind Patricia, while Adi took up the rear, still looking as calm and relaxed as he had before the operation had started. In the center of the lab was a wide cylindrical platform raised above the floor to about half the height of a man. A plastic glass cylinder enclosed the platform, the stronger-than-steel substance specially modified to protect the occupants of the room from a host of dangerous rays and particles. Within this cylinder, a swirling, ever-changing mandala of iridescent color and light floated, turning slowly, its shifting, inward-leading depths guiding the eyes of all viewers into infinity. "It's beautiful," said Dr. Fields, adjusting the darkened goggles on his face as he stood at his workstation near the darkened chamber. "Now you see, K6, why I believe in science." "No," said the voice, now strained under the weight of immeasurable agony, as the many wires leading to the being's body shuddered and coursed with power, pulsing slightly with light, revealing a large, vaguely humanoid outline in the darkened room, bound with many heavy chains. "Now you see the power of the gods." "Power that science has harnessed," answered Fields with a contemptuous sniff, looking towards the chamber. "With tonight's work, I've proven already that it will only be a matter of days before we fully extract this power from you." He smirked cruelly. "Who else could have done such a thing? And how could it be the power of the gods if it bends to natural laws and force of intellect? My force of intellect." "Why must they be different?" the voice countered, strained still, but unwavering. "I will only warn you of this truth once, Dr. Fields. You are indeed the only one who could perform this extraction, and for this you are slated for death. That death can be here, during the events of this night, or it can be later, when Apollo and the Caravnos Corporation have no further need for you. There is only one way in which you can avert these potential deaths, either now or later." "What, by freeing you?" asked Fields contemptuously, before he began to walk away from the dark chamber, looking toward the complex pattern in the containment cylinder. "Thanks for your kind and, I'm sure, a completely unselfish offer, but I think I'll pass." Looking down at the readings on the instrument panel in the base of the cylinder, Fields smiled to himself, motioning to a nearby assistant to make a few minor adjustments on her workstation. He never had the chance, however, to tell the white-coated woman what he wanted her to do, exactly. For in that moment, when Fields was looking down at his panel, a series of small explosions popped like firecrackers around the thick metal frame of the sealed door of the lab. The sound drawing his attention, Fields, as well as all the other scientists at work at their various stations in the lab, turned to look as the once sealed door tumbled forward, crashing down the short, broad stairs of the lab, and only narrowly missing one of Fields's colleagues. It didn't miss the panel that man had been using, however, and with a loud crash and spray of sparks, the panel was smashed beneath the bulk of the heavy security door. There was a long pause as the white-coated people in the lab looked at the black-clothed people at the top of the stairs. Then, quite suddenly, the lights in the room started to dim, flickering along with the lights on every panel, the sure sign of a brownout. "Oops," said Patricia, looking into the room, a hand over her mouth as she saw the scientists starting to panic. In a heartbeat, as realization of the situation's present crisis sank fully into the consciousness of each of the white-coated people, some started to yell, others started to scream, and others simply sank to their knees in abject terror. One or two even tried to pray, though it was obvious they had no practice at the art. But none of them had more than a matter of seconds before the swirling pattern of light inside the plastic glass cylinder started to expand, the entire room shuddering as it pressed against the sides of its container. In the span of 2 heartbeats, the clear shielding started to crack, light pouring soundlessly out at the seams as the mandala of light began to spin, turning into a churning vortex, leading endlessly deeper and deeper still, down to the very foundations of reality itself. Then, as suddenly as it had started to build up, the vortex started to fade and then vanished into nothing at all, the lights slowly returning to normal. Dr. Fields mopped his heavily sweating brow with his sleeve as he slumped onto the master control panel, his swift thinking and swifter actions all that had stopped death from claiming every life in the room. "You idiots!" he said in quiet, barely controlled fury, looking at the three black-clad, black-masked people who had dared to enter his private domain, his voice rapidly rising in pitch and volume. You ingrates!" Now his voice rose to a shrill scream. "Do you know what you almost did? Do you have any comprehension of the consequences of your actions? Somebody call security and get these... "If you please," said Solon, stepping forward, gun drawn. "Please, do not anybody move." However, it was too late by then for Solon to stop the inevitable with a brandished pistol. He realized this as, quite suddenly, a loud siren began to wail from somewhere outside the building, the sound audible through the open door. "Sounds like somebody found the hole in the fence," said Patricia with a sigh, her eyes rolling heavenward. "Now," said Solon, motioning with his head towards Adi. The slender European nodded once, then strode across the room, white-clad figures moving to the side at his certain, commanding presence, the diamond-tipped drill in hand and already whirring. Thrusting it forward, he slowly sank the drill into the clear plastic glass separating the darkened room from the rest of the now dimly lit lab, the tough material holding for several moments before the drill bit proved the stronger. As he worked, Solon and Patricia moved up behind him, keeping their backs to their companion and to the plexiglass shielding so as to better keep an eye on the scientists, and also on the door to the lab, through which, no doubt, security forces would soon be arriving. "Don't do that, you—" began Dr. Fields, only to be cut off as a loud crack filled the room. So loud it made everyone flinch at the noise, a spider web of distress lines appearing on the plexiglass. "You've killed us all," Fields ended in a dry-mouthed whisper, his eyes wide as he stared at the spreading lines of fracture. "Only those who deserve to die," answered Solon with a casual shrug. "But then, doesn't everybody?" It was at that moment of casual shrugging, as Solon's eyes shifted for a second towards where Adi was using the drill on the shielding between the lab and the subject's chambers, that Fields acted. Solon was caught completely off guard as the scientist seized and then threw a large and heavy 3-ring binder into his face, putting a bullet neatly through its pages in the moment before Fields hit him with a well-placed fist, knocking the Mediterranean man to the ground. "Nobody ever believes me when I tell them I was a flyweight boxing champ in school," scoffed Fields, seizing the gun that Solon had dropped and training it on the three black-clad companions. "Now, step away from—" Then it was Adi's turn to move. In a single smooth motion he dropped the drill, his hand going to the sword on his back, already starting to turn. The drill was halfway to the floor as he drew the blade, both hands now grasping the hilt. When the drill hit the floor, the shearing edge of the katana had sliced smoothly through the meat and bone of Dr. Fields's forearm, where his lab coat sleeve had slid upward as he held out the gun. Solon, Patricia, and Fields all stared at the suddenly spurting stump at the end of Fields's arm. Adi, on the other hand, simply gave his blade the traditional shake, clearing it of any residual blood, and then smoothly slid it back into its sheath. "Very nice, Adi," said Solon as he bent to pry the severed hand from his gun, then kicked the severed limb towards Fields as he rose, blood-stained gun now trained on the room once more. "Best get that packed in ice so that it can be reattached, my good doctor. I hear they can work wonders with reconstructive surgery in these days." Snatching his hand up, Fields stuck his new stump beneath his armpit, squeezing down as tightly as he could. "Tourniquet!" he hissed urgently as he stumbled back towards his colleagues, all now huddled near the rows of panels and other scientific instruments they had only recently been using.
Somebody get their belt off and help me.
One of the white-coated men was moving to act on his boss's demand just as a flickering display of red dots played through the room. All eyes turned towards the entryway, where a tight-packed knot of Karafnos guards, dressed in the dark blue and faded bronze of their company, were already in a firing line, the first rank kneeling while the second rank stood, laser-sighted weapons sweeping the room for only a moment as they acquired their targets, before every red dot zeroed in on the three black-clad companions, the most obvious and heavily armed targets in the room. Fields smirked grimly as he used a sturdy metal ruler and the offered belt of the lab assistant to stop the gush of blood from his stump. He was about to taunt the doomed invaders of his temple of science, decrying their blasphemy for a final time before they would be finished in one way or another, before he frowned. There was an increase in light in the room, enough that it was as though he wasn't even wearing his dark goggles. It started slowly at first, the glimmer drawing Fields' attention towards the containment cylinder, where the labyrinth had only started to appear before the extraction process was interrupted. Quickly, however, the light grew in magnitude, until everyone in the room, except for Fields, was forced to shield their faces or be blinded by its light. Fields, however, gaped as he stared into the raw power being unleashed before his protected eyes. There was a second loud crack, this one followed by the sounds of plexiglass tinkling as it struck the hard floor of the lab. Fields couldn't see more than the tall, broad-shouldered outline of the being that had been his test subject only a short while ago, standing between the searing light of the labyrinth and the three black-clad invaders of the lab like a towering monolith of darkness. His presence seemed to absorb the light all around him, pulling it into himself, even as the silhouette of his horned head turned to look straight at Fields, his eyes like gateways leading into the shining, infinite expanse of reality itself. "I told you, Dr. Bereth Abram Fields," said the being, his soft, deep, powerful voice not really a sound as much as it was a force echoing directly into Fields' mind, "that you would die if you did not free me. Now I cannot save you. The labyrinth is returning to me, and it will take all my resolve just to preserve the three lives behind me. Your own ambition has doomed you." "Arr!" gaped Fields, his voice drowned out to all but mental communication in the vast cacophony of sound that filled the room. "Are you a god?" "You already know the answer to that," said the being that was the only shadow in the light, the only point of darkness in the entire room. "There are no gods. There are only beings more or less enlightened. Unfortunately, your enlightenment comes too late to save you in this life. I only pray that you will learn from your experiences in the next." Then the time for words passed, and everything faded into white. "Are we still alive?" asked Patricia, lifting her head from where she'd been cowering on the floor. "It appears so," said Solon, with a smirk. Patricia heard more than saw, since the lights in the room had gone completely out, leaving them all in nothing but the vague green luminescence from a glow stick Adi cracked. "We are the only ones left, I believe. He has saved us, as I knew he would, if only we saved him first." Her eyes slowly adjusting to the minimal light, Patricia turned her head, her heart pounding as she looked up, and still up, and up some more, at the being they'd saved from the Gordian facility. Like some dread pagan eidolon from ages past, the being stood there, his very existence causing a sense of presence to come over Patricia. This was not a normal creature, some mortal candle's flicker of life to be snuffed out at the least variation from a narrow survivable range of conditions. For the first time in her life, Patricia began to believe in the gods. "My father was right," whispered Adi softly, the awe in his voice a reflection of what Patricia was feeling inside. "We must leave quickly," said the voice of the being, the words more felt than heard, making Patricia shiver all over with goosebumps. "There are forces that will know I have been freed, and they will act quickly once this realization comes to them. Come. Solon has prepared a safe place for us to rest and to rebuild." The being turned, and Patricia found, like Adi, and even the snide Solon, that she had no choice but to follow. She had, after all, already made her choice before setting foot into the Gordian facility. Now was the time to live with her choice. She only hoped it had been the right one.